and Patti Habeck from Feeding America is going to provide us with insights on non-for-profits and a little bit about Feeding America, and she's going to educate us, right? Well, I was thinking about this. I don't want to steal any of your thunder, Patti, but as I was researching a little bit about you and a little bit about your organization, one of the things that you tout on your website is that 1 in 8 Americans, forget the world for the time being, 1 in 8 Americans have food insecurity. And I didn't know what food insecurity was, so I looked it up. Food insecurity is not being hungry, right? It's about not knowing if you're going to have a meal. It's about not knowing if you're going to have a complete meal. It's about thinking about making sacrifices just to be able to eat. And if you landed, right, if you came out of space and you landed on this planet and you said, take me to the wealthiest country in the world. I mean, you might get Monaco, but I got a feeling that they would come to the U.S. and plop us down right here and say, look at these vast resources. But we got to tell you something. While this may be the richest country in the world, right, 1 in 8 have food insecurity, right, 12%. If there's 320 million Americans, if I do fast math, that's roughly 40 million Americans. So take Greater New York, take Greater Los Angeles, put them together, and you're still missing hungry people. And if I look around this room, right, I personally don't know anybody that has food security. And my guess is looking at you probably don't either. But how far would we have to walk outside of these doors, right, to be able to find somebody that does? So there's a hidden population, right, that we're not able to see. And this, Patti, is what I'm excited about, you being able to help educate us on the issues. There's a part of me that says, I hope someday you're out of business. I really do.
Working on it.
Wonderful. So with that's enough for me. Patti, floor is yours.
I'm going to talk a little bit about first about nonprofits in general across the United States, and then I'm going to make it small. I'm going to talk to you about Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin, and then hopefully bring it up to what are we going to do to change this? To the point that was raised, I want to go out of business. I would love to be out of business, and we have that possibility. There is more than enough food, and there's more than enough money in the world to take care of this problem. What we're missing is coordination and will, and that's what I work with. And so let me get rolling here and just ignore if I'm consulting my notes a little bit more. Just give me a chance to kick back in here. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I didn't know what nonprofits were. I didn't go into nonprofits. I don't even quite know how I fell into nonprofits, but I'm really glad I'm here. I actually went to college. I'm from the East Coast. I was born in Milwaukee, but I'm from the East Coast. Fell back into Wisconsin because of some family, and I was supposed to be a dentist. I got an undergrad degree in biochemistry. I was a periodontal surgeon assistant to make my way through college. And I was on my way to be a dentist. I had a space waiting for me at the New Jersey School of Medicine and Dentistry. And somewhere along the line, I got involved in community work. And the community work was fascinating. So I said, I'll take 1 year off. And I have yet to go back to dental school. So, and it's lots of years later. So I got a master's degree in crisis and community. And that just, again, led me into what we don't often see on the surface about our neighborhoods. And it doesn't matter which community you're talking about. The numbers, everything is just under the surface. You will find hungry people, you will find homelessness, you will find mental health issues, you will find health, whatever the issue is, you're going to find it in every single community. It's just how you're able to see it. Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it isn't. Our mission at Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin is to solve hunger, and we're going to talk a little bit about this as we get to the end of this presentation. But I want you to keep in mind that our mission is to solve hunger, not to address hunger, not to keep serving forevermore. It is to solve hunger, so it's much more complicated than just food in and food out. Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin is the largest hunger relief organization in the state. Doesn't mean that we're better than everybody else. It doesn't mean that pantries don't do it right. It just means that we're large, and we're designed to be large for a very good reason, which we'll talk about. We cover the 35 counties of eastern Wisconsin, 65% of the state. So our organization is really supporting a lot. We're supporting urban, rural, small metro, about 500,000 people. And we're going to get into Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin kind of at the end, but I want to take you back up to nonprofits in general, just so you kind of get an understanding of the sector before we go back down, because understanding the sector is the key to understanding how we're actually going to solve hunger. So charitable nonprofits embody the best of America. They provide a way for people to work together for the common good, transforming shared beliefs and hopes into action. The whole thing about a nonprofit sector is some kind of action. They give shape to our boldest dreams, our highest ideals, and our noblest causes. America, the US, has more than 1.5 million nonprofits. Huge number of nonprofits. And think about all of that being supported by individuals and corporations and foundations. These 1.5 million nonprofits feed, heal, shelter, educate, inspire, enlighten, and nurture people of every age, every gender, race, socioeconomic background, from coast to coast, and really beyond. They foster civic engagement and leadership, drive economic growth, and strengthen the fabric of communities every single day. We get up, we do it again the next day. In many ways, the nonprofit sector is really no different than every other sector. What you do every day is what I do every day. I have HR issues. I have business, a whole lot of different business pieces to consider. I have to think about revenue streams. The difference really is I'm not making a profit. I'm investing anything that comes in. I'm investing back into our mission. Every person in the United States benefits from the work of nonprofits. Every single person. In one way or the other. You just may not realize where you're touching the nonprofit sector. It's easy to see the work if it's something visible. A neighbor is receiving food assistance, or a family member is in an accident and gets patched up over at the hospital. Rescue efforts to hurricane relief. We've had that more than once in the last couple of years. Those are easy to see. It's harder to recognize the full impact of indirect benefits that nonprofit sector actually provides to us. For example, when a Friends of organization, a Friends of a local library, a friend of a park or an environmental, when they raise money, they're supporting the cause, they're supporting the nonprofit, but they're actually doing a lot of purchasing as well. They're purchasing books, if it's a library, or they're purchasing capital or equipment. And that all gets invested back into the economy. The nonprofit sector generates a lot of indirect benefits and then direct benefits to the economy. Even later, we'll talk a little bit about food share, which is the name for our food stamps, the old food stamps. That generates a lot of local business, a lot of local spending in the economy. So it's an important part of it, even as it's supporting people who are in need. Nonprofits play a fundamental role in creating a more equitable and thriving community. And nonprofits, when they're working together, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about collaboration because that's the only way we can go. When nonprofits are collaborating with each other, with the private sector, what we are doing is really generating benefit for America and actually trying to move America to a much better place. So here are some ways that you might have been affected by nonprofits. If you entered the world through a hospital, 50% of our hospitals are nonprofits. If you avoided polio, if you've never gotten polio in your life, March of Dimes is to thank for raising a lot of the money that the research and funding the research that led to those vaccines. If you attend service at a house of worship, there's about 350,000 nonprofit congregations, and it's probably not larger now. Some of these numbers might be a couple years old. If you learned to swim at a local YMCA, or if you went to scout camp, and all those memories are flooding back in your mind right now about going to a camp or a scout camp, nonprofits. If you attended nonprofit schools or colleges, if you exercised your right to vote or to learn or to travel, those rights are often secured and protected by various nonprofits. If you visited historic landmarks, museums, zoos, art centers, science museums, nonprofit. Inhaled cleaner air in restaurants, that whole anti-tobacco push very much was put together by nonprofits. And of course, our environment and all the parks and all the places that you can go with your families, where you can go to camp, many of those are nonprofits as well. The three largest subsectors representing nonprofits: education, of the 1.5 million that I talked to you about, which is actually, those numbers change all the time, and quite honestly, locally we have a whole heck of a lot of nonprofits that pop up all the time, so it's really hard to count. But education's the largest sector at 21%, largest subsector. Health is just underneath that. Human services, 17% of nonprofits are human services, and then arts, culture, and humanity is about 14%. So those are the largest. If you would add up all the payroll, and I know you can't read that, but it doesn't really matter. It's the big point is it actually, the payroll from nonprofits would exceed construction. It would exceed a lot of things that you wouldn't really realize. There's a lot of money from the nonprofit sector going back. Most nonprofits are considered small. Small nonprofits, about 35% of that 150 million, are under 1 million in operating revenues. 41% are somewhere under 25 million, and then there's actually only 25% are those super large nonprofits. And you could probably name a lot of those off the top of your head. And if you go back and think about the education sector, you can throw in colleges into that, a lot of colleges into that, and you will know where those big ones are. So I want to talk to you just a little bit, because this is so timely, on how the pandemic really started playing into the nonprofit finances across the country, and specifically then in Wisconsin. The COVID pandemic, global health and economic crisis, and it's impacted nonprofits significantly. While trying to serve struggling families and communities, some nonprofits find themselves squeezed beyond their capacity. Some had to cease operations, others had to dramatically shift, including my own. We had to completely remodel ourselves in order to respond not only to needs, but to changes in our world around us. And we're a 40-year-old organization. To make shifts at this point and to do it overnight was fun. For organizations like mine, the supply chain crisis, so things that also went along with COVID, the supply chain crisis. Majority of our product was donated, and suddenly we had to look at purchasing. It was very significant shift. And there were also positive effects. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But when nonprofits across the country were surveyed, 28% were concerned that their current financial situation was not good and was going to get worse. That's a very significant number of nonprofits that are worried about their future. Many nonprofits were held afloat by governmental supports, the money that came in through the CARES Act. What happens when that money disappears? How are they going to survive when the demand is still high? For our organization, for a long time, we worried about a food cliff. It was the end of, middle of 2020 and 2021, and we started thinking about, okay, when these federal supports, nutrition supports went away, how are we going to support the increase in people that were coming, increase in demand on the hunger relief system? What were we going to do? And that food cliff was very, very real to us, and we worried about it. Fortunately, for us, the government was able to provide a little bit longer time period, so we have a little bit longer to adjust. But the question remains, it's just kicked down the road a little bit. While the pandemic brought negative things, it also brought out a huge amount of generosity. Individuals, corporations, foundations, all responded to the nonprofit sector in incredible ways. So this slide is just showing you, and again, if you don't see it, the gist is this. The nonprofit sector gets funded in only a certain amount of ways. There is a certain amount of earned revenue, 49%, it's a large section of it. There is 32% that is government works with nonprofits to do the work, and so there's government contracts. And then after that, you see the yellow is individual donations, 8.7%. That's a significant amount, but it's only 8.7% of the funding. And then after that, it's foundations and bequests, and then corporation support. During COVID, what happened is that 70% of nonprofits began to lose revenue. And there was a number of different reasons for that. Again, 49% of nonprofits earn, 49% of the money going into nonprofits was from earned revenue. But when gatherings were shuttered, think about your museums and your performing arts centers, when things were shuttered, that money goes away. When audiences were limited because of social distancing, or volunteers weren't able to come out. That impacted revenue streams. Programs particularly were disrupted. And I will say that even funding support from individuals, corporations, and foundations were affected because things like fundraising galas didn't happen or went virtual. And I will say, even though there's been some very, very nice virtual events, they don't replace the in-person events. Revenue from special events, for example, went down about 59%, so that's a huge drop. Small nonprofits who are financially fragile had the least ability to respond to increased expenses. So think about the PPE, think about the things you have to do in your businesses. All of those were additional expenses that were unplanned, unbudgeted for, and small nonprofits had the hardest time being able to adjust to that. Those with organizational and cash reserves, for the most part, were able to weather the storm, but they don't look the same on the other side. We don't look the same on the other side. What I would say is whenever you hear how a nonprofit has weathered the COVID storm, always know there's a story behind the story. Sometimes you're going to see that there were benefits, and that's great, but ask the story. Ask your nonprofits, tell me about the story on how you've been affected by COVID, and you're going to hear there's always a story behind the story. We got very creative during this time. Nonprofits are facing challenges all the time. Operating a nonprofit is not easy. Nonprofits face serious and growing challenges that limit our ability to serve people in communities that rely on us. Same thing that you're experiencing. If you are experiencing the social change that's happening in our communities, HR, recruiting, retaining, finding employees, same thing is happening at the nonprofit level. Some of these are internal forces, and then there's the external forces that are larger than any one organization. A lot of these changes are systemic and they're system-wide. I believe we can overcome all of these challenges, but we can only do it through collaboration, and I'm not even talking about just collaboration with nonprofits. It's really vital that we all the sectors start thinking of each other as interconnected and that we're really working together. I will always say that my engagement with corporations, for example, is not a funding relationship. Funding is important, but there's a lot that I need from a corporation, and there's a lot that a corporation needs from nonprofits. And when we really think about it that way, it goes beyond a transactional relationship and it starts becoming really transformational. And that's what we need from the business sector. I do want to just highlight a little bit about the second one, policy proposals at all levels of government. This is not political. Hunger is not a partisan issue by any means. But I just want to share, and again, I know the writing is small, but I'm going to give you the overview on it. It's really simple to understand this slide. I'm going to give you an example of 2016. So this is pre-pandemic. 2016, politics being what they are, doesn't really matter what side you're on, what you believed at the time. The fact is that there was a proposal to make significant changes to food stamps. Whether it's right or wrong, whether it should or shouldn't happen, again, whatever your feeling is on it, just set it aside for a minute and look at the issue. That would have happened and taken effect pretty quickly. The government supports through federal nutrition programs is 12 times bigger in the country, across the country, than all of the hunger relief nonprofits put together. Every food bank, every food pantry, every meal program, every emergency shelter. No matter how many of us you put together and put all of our resources together, the governmental supports of that system are 12 times bigger. If there would have been a sudden change to that, a sudden cut to that, it doesn't mean that all of those people supported by those programs would suddenly disappear. Those same people would go and find the nonprofit sector because they need to eat. And they would have found the nonprofit sector, and the nonprofit sector would have struggled to respond to that large of an influx all at once. Of course, little did we know that the pandemic was going to hit a couple years later and we were going to be adjusting to huge numbers anyway. But in order to make up from the private sector supporting nonprofits, the changes that were proposed back in 2016, which didn't go anywhere, it didn't pass, so we're in good shape. But you would have had to take the top 15 endowments of all the largest endowments in the country, take all 15, sell off the assets, put those assets into the nonprofits in order for us to be able to support what would have been cut from the federal side. So just understand it's not a political issue. The issue is really that the nonprofit sector is strong, it's big. I mean, you can think about it. Think about all the nonprofits you know. Think about all the hunger serving organizations you know. And then think, if there is a sudden and drastic change, we also need the support of the community to get behind us to make sure that all of those individuals have enough food to eat. So let me talk now specifically about Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin. And let me say this, I really hope that you're taking notes, and after I run through this, I hope we have a robust dialogue. I will go in whatever direction you want me to talk about. I will answer any question, prepared to answer anything, and so I really hope this becomes a dialogue and you ask good questions. So keep those in mind as I'm talking. Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin is a food bank. And what makes a food bank different than a food pantry or meal program? If you haven't seen our facility, I welcome you for a tour, and you will understand the difference as soon as you walk in the door. A food bank has sometimes been talked about as a food pantry to the food pantries. It's one way to think about it. You can think about a food bank as a wholesaler without a currency exchange in many cases. That's what we do. What a food bank does is it provides the food that's needed at food pantries, meal programs, and emergency shelters so that they can continue to serve their communities. It does not mean that all food should funnel through us. Absolutely not. Every local food pantry should have relationships in their community to try to find charitable food at their food level. All it means is we are the voice, the collective, of where hunger relief organizations come together, create a shared voice, and together we are creating leverage and scale so we can reach out and get more food to enter into the charitable food network. We help move that food across this vast territory. So if you're looking at this, you're seeing a couple of things. Where the stars are two food bank locations. One is in Appleton off of 41. You probably have seen that one. It's our newest one. It joined us 6 years ago. And the other one is in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is where we were founded 40 years ago. And it is 3 times as big as the one in Appleton. Although I will say that Appleton was built from the ground up, so it has very similar efficiency as Milwaukee. It's just smaller. But what it does is we are not looking to expand. Those 2 food banks will serve this 35-county area. What we need is the fleet to be able to move the food around. We don't need more buildings. So what we do is we work with growers and grocers and manufacturers and lately government. That has been a new piece that we've added to get as much food donated into the charitable food system. We bring that in. We do the inventory, receiving, sorting, and we make all of that food available through an online system where food pantries and meal programs, emergency shelters, those serving charitable food to to those in need, can look at that menu and order off that menu whatever it is that they need, by pallet, by case, whatever it is, and then we make that available to them either through deliveries. In Southeast, we have people who pick up at our warehouse, but in Northeast, we do it mostly through deliveries. We have about 400 food pantry partners across our entire footprint. 200 or so are up in Northeast Wisconsin, about 200 down in Southeast Wisconsin. Again, our mission is to solve hunger. We changed this about 5 years ago. We went from serving the need, that was our former mission statement, to solving, and I'll tell you why we did this. Serving the need means we know what the need is, we're going to go out, we're going to get food, and then move it to where it needs to go, and we're going to do that day in and day out all the time. That was not good enough. It didn't answer the questions of what is hunger, what should it look like, what is the nutritional quality, is it culturally appropriate food, do we know where it needs to go? It was pounds in and pounds out. And I will tell you that I joined the organization 10 years ago, and at one point we were measured by pounds. So if you think about it, lettuce weighs very little, and Gatorade weighs a lot. So if we're just measuring our impact by pounds, we're not exactly telling our story. And so it was not good enough to have serve the need as a mission, so we changed it to solve hunger. And when we did that, we also knew that the only way you can solve hunger is through partnerships, through collaborations, by coming together. We cannot solve hunger by ourselves. Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin is a great organization, cannot solve it by ourselves. We need every food pantry, meal program, emergency shelter, partner, friend, Boys and Girls Club, organization. Anybody who wants to come around the table to solve hunger, we need them to be a part of the conversation and solve hunger together, and we'll get there. These are just some of our belief statements, and what you will see is nutrition. That was added about 5 years ago. We have a nutrition policy by which we follow. We measure all our food. Just in the last year, we've been able to start tracking that. And so we can actually not only measure what type of food, but we can actually see if we're meeting our nutrition policy and make adjustments along the way if need be. Again, you'll see collaboration on there. And fiscal responsibility, transparency, and accountability is huge and important when you're dealing with the amount of the size that we are and the amount of food that's coming in and out. And so we're really, really proud of that fiscal responsibility, transparency, and accountability. We are a 4-star charity from Charity Navigator, and we've been so for 8 years. I might be off on that a little bit, which is very, very uncommon and very rare. And so we are really proud of that piece. Again, we're a 40-year-old organization. We were founded by the Milwaukee Rotary. This was the idea of a Rotary Club in Milwaukee that said, you know what would be really helpful is if all the food pantries were able to come together and have conversations, and if they used one voice to go out and reach out. So we kind of think co-op. That's essentially what was started. This one I know you can't read, but I can explain it to you in 30 seconds. The flow of food. This is on our website if you really want to dive into this. The flow of food, and I will say that this chart had to change this year because our flow of food changed due to the pandemic. What you're seeing in the picture is we go out or we respond to where donated food, where food needs to enter into the system. And again, we're not talking about food drives. We do about 58 million pounds of food. Actually, we brought in over 60 million pounds of food. We're talking about food at a large scale. And so it doesn't help us, nor does it help our partner pantries if we go out and do a lot of food drives by the box. That is a really good model for food pantries, perhaps. It is not necessarily a good model when you're moving about 60 million pounds of food, because all of that needs to come back and get sorted. So we will do that, but we will very often move that food directly to the local pantry where that food drive was done. What we're trying to do is to get to those growers, those grocers, those manufacturers, those retailers, those producers, and talk to them about what it is that they need to contribute into the system. If you think about lean manufacturing and all that has been going on over the last number of years, you know that manufacturers have gotten much, much better at knowing exactly what to manufacture, exactly what to put into the stores at any given time. Stores and retailers have gotten so much better about knowing exactly what to order. And actually, when stores got so good at that, COVID actually called them to the table on it by saying, you order just enough toilet paper for just the right time, well, COVID comes and you're out of toilet paper and it's going to be a hard time to get it back. But we used to benefit from a lot of the overages, and that disappeared. So we had to turn around and say, okay, let's adjust. Let's send our people out to manufacturers and say, this is what the need is in the community. This is what we need you to put in. So we go out and we find food. All right, so now we have food coming in. I will also say, the picture underneath it is that we purchase food. This is what COVID did to us about 3 years ago. We purchased very little amount of food. We didn't need to purchase because we were getting good donations and our partners were very good at wanting to donate to us. COVID hit and we ended up in competition with grocery stores and other places that had more money to purchase. It got really difficult for a while there because even if we had the money, we couldn't find a place to purchase the product. And so we worked our way through that bubble, but we are now purchasing more food so that we can have more control over what it is that we're purchasing, what the pantries need, and going out and finding it. An example of benefit by purchasing is we were able to take fresh produce, which was one of our lowest categories a number of years ago. It is now our number one category. It fluctuates with number two depending on what's included in it, but it's one of our number one or number two categories. Protein, very similar. And then our third one is dairy. And it's because now we can go out and use those dollars to intentionally purchase for what's needed. The food comes into the food bank, either we go pick it up. So if you're wondering where our costs are, sometimes we're running our trucks. We have a fleet of 15 vehicles. We're running our trucks out to go pick up, or we're paying contracts to bring it in, or it gets dropped off at our docks. Both of our food banks are large receiving facilities, so they can receive the product. It gets inventoried right away, so that the rule is it can't be used for anything other than the mission. And everything gets brought in immediately and put into the inventory, because that food will go out to those in need. This will not end up, if there's a coffee donation, we don't allow our staff to go out and take coffee for our kitchen out of there. It's just not something that we will do, because all that food was intended to go to those in need, and that's where we're going to put it. We receipt and we provide the receipts for the donor. If you think about this, if you're a large manufacturer and you have 20 pantries in your community and they're all calling you and saying, will you make a donation? The companies are not set up to respond to small amounts of requests like that. They might be able to do it on a one-off, but it is much easier to have one entity go out and pick up at the scale that's needed, and then to take it back and then make it available to the pantries. Now let me say this, one other big change that we did, and I'm celebrating it because it was probably the biggest biggest change we made in 40 years, is all of that used to have a cost that was shared by the pantries. It's called a shared maintenance fee. And so food banks were founded as an innovation. If all the pantries got together, shared the cost of the transportation of donated product, then they would get the product at a much cheaper cost, and they all had a share in it. It was a great model in 1982. It is not necessarily a great model now, because brands grow over the years. And so about a year or so ago, actually it started the pandemic, okay, so almost 3 years ago, we were able to eliminate all the costs, all the shared maintenance fees, and now that's something that Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin takes on. That was enormous, and we did it for two reasons. One, it's good for the pantries, and it's important for us to serve the pantries. That's what we're designed to do. And two, it was an equity issue. Pantries who had the most money could get the best product. They had the more money to order, they had more staff to jump online and get the good product right away as soon as we posted it. And a lot of other pantries were left out of the equity of that distribution system. By changing it the way we did, we now have more equitable distribution, and we can do more of a push model and know that we want to move the product into certain communities. When all is said and done, the food gets delivered to where it needs to go, and then the pantries can make use of it and share it with their communities. I get asked the question all the time of, is this model, will we always work through a network of pantries? And I will say yes, we will always work through the network of pantries. If you go back to the map and think about the map I just showed you, we don't want to have a location in every single community, and it is important that those communities have a voice in what they need and what they want. And that is where the pantries are experts. And then those pantries, if they don't have to work so hard at getting food, those pantries can work harder at engaging with the person in need and possibly doing some wraparound services and helping that community lift itself up. And so it's good all around, and it's part of a really integrated network. Some of our impact this year, I'll just pull out a few of these thoughts. I said that we're purchasing more than we ever did before. We're purchasing 530% more than we've purchased in the past, a huge number, which means I had to get people on my team who are really good at procurement, and that was new for us. And so we have a really good purchasing team right now. Distributing about 53 million pounds annually, and I see that going up. Volunteer hours, we used during the pandemic. It's down a little bit, quite a bit actually, because we had to we stopped volunteers in Milwaukee, and we made them quite smaller in Appleton, but still did 35,000 volunteer hours last year. So root causes, how are we going to get to solve? First of all, it depends how you define self-hunger. People will challenge me on this all the time to say, hunger's always among us, poverty's always among us. It started, the Bible even says, poverty will always be among you. And I say, yes, that's true, but the next part of that is, so do all the good you can in all the ways you can, at all the times you can, to just make it better. And so self-hunger to me is a time when every person who is experiencing food insecurity has the ability to have access to healthy, nutritious food, and culturally appropriate when we can, food to sustain a healthy life for themselves and their families. In order to get to that, we would love it if everybody was able to use the traditional food systems, to use the systems that you and I and everybody else uses, grocery stores or purchasing from farmers markets. And so in other words, the hunger relief system goes away, the emergency relief system goes away. But instead, we'll be satisfied when everybody is connected to the system and not left out. There's not gaps in the system. And so you can see some of the root causes of poverty, and I just kind of put it here, but it's pretty intuitive, that biggest expenses in a household, housing, utilities, food, medical transportation, all of that. People only have so many resources. It's their income or their assets. It's personal assistance, societal assistance. Whatever goes into the household has to be greater than what their needs are. If it's not greater, you're experiencing a gap. There's also real challenges. I get asked all the time. There's a lot of employment needs right now. Why are people not able to find the jobs to sustain? You guys are in finance. You know that it's a really complex issue. Sometimes people aren't at the place where they're ready to really be able to succeed at good paying jobs. So we have to help them get to that point where they can succeed. Sometimes people are experiencing something that doesn't allow them to work, health issue or something along that line. Majority of people that are in need are in that area where they're really close. They're living paycheck to paycheck. In fact, 40% of the people, the numbers that you saw, the 1 in 8 that was mentioned, 40% are really close to that line and can usually take care of themselves until something knocks them out of whack a little bit, a big car repair, medical bill, something along that line. The root causes of hunger, how we solve it. There's higher education, and I will say that doesn't mean college necessarily. It means trades, it means technical schools, it means apprenticeships, some kind of education that will allow people to have a higher level job. Employment, financial literacy, housing, healthcare, and inside of healthcare, it's also mental health care. That's a huge piece. There's so much that I would love to add. Part of the work that I do is being exceptionally creative towards the problems. So let me give you a couple of examples. I know that one of the ways that the numbers of people in need is going up. It's slowing, it's stabilizing to some extent, but the numbers are elevated. It's huge. In the territory I serve, I'm supporting about 500,000 people in need through that network that I talked to you about. That's a huge number. In order for me to make sure that they have the food, I can't afford to purchase every piece of food that is needed in those families. So I need to think of other ways to be able to bring in more than 58 million pounds of food, because there needs to be more into the system. So innovation. We've launched one. I'm a big game theorist. I'm also a big social innovation person. So we've helped to launch and be a part of one innovation that was launched. If you guys have heard of Fork Farms. Fork Farms is up here in Titletown Tech. Alex Taink started it. It's a home, it's a pod of growing hydroponic system. And Alex used to work for us when he was working to build his company, build his business. And we said, great, come and work for us. Help us figure out how we can use this to get more greens to pantries, more healthy, nutritious food to pantries. And so as he was building his business, he was working with us, and we were figuring it out. If we could, for some of the pantries in our rural areas, for example, that didn't have refrigeration and coolers, if we were able to place one of these hydroponic grow pods, they could grow and harvest and distribute the greens just in time. Example. If we need to go bigger, there are small farmers who have excess land, who love to farm, but they need to get paid. So how could we do it cheaper than buying product right off their land? We sat down and worked with farmers, local farmers, to say, how can we do contract growing? How can we help you connect to sources that we have, donors that we have? How can we help that so that we're all benefiting from this? So we started something called FarmLink, and that is local farmers and contract growing, and we can do it for pennies to the dollar of what we would do and we said, we'll share the risk. If you have a bad year, we have a bad year with you. If you have a great year, we have a great year with you. So we spread out, kind of like diversifying your portfolio. We spread out these farms across our footprint and hope that more produce excess and less have bad years. But that allows the farmer to grow on their land exactly what it is that they are certain. They're the experts. We don't tell them we want X. We let them be farmers. And that has been really beneficial to us. We're working on a partnership right now to go into hydroponics at a commercial level with an entity that works in workforce development. They have the hydroponics in order to support their workforce development mission. I need what they produce so that I can feed hunger. If we put us end to end, they're experts in workforce and growing. We're experts in transportation, storage, and distribution. Put us end to end, and if this produces according to what we are expecting in the next few years, we will probably be able to grow the majority of the fresh product that we need for eastern Wisconsin. And when there's excess, the benefit of being part of a national network, we're independent, but we're part of our national network. There are 200 food banks across the country. When I have access, I can trade across through other food banks. Example, Del Monte in Wisconsin. We grow a lot of vegetables. We can a lot of vegetables. So we have a partnership with Del Monte to do something called Brights. It saves them costs. They can it for us, but they don't label it. We bring it into our facility. We have our volunteers label it. And we use that product. It's excellent, right off the farm, canned vegetables. But we have excess. So what we do is we have the ability to trade it. So we have a choice system across the country. And I trade it for peanut butter from Atlanta. They have an excess of peanut butter. Or I trade some of our excess corn for cantaloupe from Texas. So this is like, a lot of thought goes into this, but if we do it, then we have diversified food sourcing. In Milwaukee, we have things like baby boxes. There's Black maternal health in the city of Milwaukee. Extraordinary poor negative outcomes of mothers and babies in Milwaukee. So we have a baby box program that we are setting up that not only will provide the food for the first year and diapers. That's an important piece, but it's a piece that doesn't solve hunger, that serves. Solving hunger is the partnerships we've formed with the doulas, with the healthcare systems, all of those to come together to say, okay, food is a piece. And now people we have their attention because there's food. How can we use this food to really reach in and make the changes? Again, doing it with somebody and not on our own. I am not solving Black maternal health in Milwaukee. I am a piece of that. And up here in Northeast Wisconsin, one of my favorite programs is the Tribal Elder Food Box Program. That was an idea that's been floating around in various pieces, just needed to be pulled together. So the Intertribal Council and the Food Hub Cooperative and the state and Feeding Wisconsin, which is our state network of Feeding America food banks, came together with others to put it all together and say, how can we reach tribal elders with culturally appropriate food and do that to tribal lands across the state. And we did a really nice 6-month pilot. It was wildly successful. We attracted more funding into it, and we're going to expand it this year. Could go on because that is the work of Solve. So what I'm trying to do right now is keep about 60% of what I'm doing as Serve, 40% of what I'm doing is my energy, my resources into solving hunger. What you can do to be involved, I keep this up here all the time. Let me just now go back up to nonprofits as a whole. You can do it. You can donate to Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin, and I will appreciate you. You can volunteer with us, and I'm going to appreciate you a lot. And that's all important. But again, I can't solve anything by myself. I have all the nonprofit sector out there that needs the same thing. So this slide, please consider very general. If you want to help the nonprofit sector, if you want to help your communities, if you want to help your local economies, you need to invest into the nonprofit sector. Food Funds and Friends, for us, same concept for other nonprofits. What they need is support financially. Our organization can turn $1 into $10 worth of groceries, which is why we often ask for funds instead of food donations, because we can scale and leverage that. It's not to be selfish and ask for more dollars. Food, so donations of food. If you want to do that, if you want to do a food drive, absolutely we will help you do it. But we're probably going to partner with a local pantry to make sure that we can help that pantry receive the benefits of that. Or we'll bring it in and we'll distribute it. But Food Funds, Friends, volunteerism. Volunteerism is incredibly important, whether it's on the board, whether it's actually physically volunteering, bring your families out, teach your young kids to volunteer, because that is as important to me as the funds that get donated. I love that fact that we are generously supported by our community financially, but I love even more when I can walk into our warehouse and talk and work with our volunteers, because those volunteers, the more I have, the faster they work, the more they're willing to get involved, the faster I can turn around product and get it out the door, which makes room in my warehouse to bring more in the door. So you can see how the system works. But again, follow your passion, follow any nonprofit. It doesn't have to be basic needs. Arts, organizations, I will argue all day long, that is a basic need. If I can't give my people hope, inspiration, resiliency, which comes through the arts very often, I can't solve hunger. So please support the arts, support education, because it's all tied together. So find your passion and get involved with that. And I will say that all day long. I will love it if Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin is your passion. It's not for everybody, and that's great. Just do something and get involved. So with that, I think I have time for questions. Very good. So please ask, and I will go in any direction you want to go. Yes?
Yeah. One of the questions I had was surrounding giving time. You said that you had to cut back during COVID, you had to cut back some of the ability for people to volunteer. Are any of those restrictions in place today, or is it much more open?
It is much more open. There are still some restrictions.
Given that the audience can't hear you, would you be kind enough to repeat the question?
Oh, thank you.
Otherwise, it's a game of Jeopardy for them.
Yes, thank you. Online folks, this one's for you. No, the question really was, are we still accepting volunteers at the same level now? Has that opened up and allowed more spaces for volunteering than it was when we had to restrict because of COVID? The answer is a little bit of yes and no. We still are spacing people. It is critical that our food bank stays open. We worked extremely hard during COVID to keep the food banks open. In fact, I restricted my staff from traveling between the two facilities because if one food bank went down, I needed the other one to work, and we were just going to do everything mobily. I had that plan. And we also interact with 400 pantries who need to stay open. And so we really took the safety procedures seriously. So we are still masked, we are still social distancing, but we have a lot of space. And now where we've loosened up is family groups, corporate groups who have been working together and they're comfortable coming together. We allow that to happen. What we did is we separate now our staff from the volunteers. So if anything happens, it's happening within our volunteer group and not interacting with our staff. We're also feeling better about where the numbers are going. And so we will take volunteer groups in larger numbers now in both of our facilities, Milwaukee and Fox Valley.
Could you explain, please, the link between the local and the national Feeding America?
Yes, so the question was the link between our local Feeding America and national office. Of the 200 Feeding America food banks across the country, there is a food bank that covers every piece of geography in the United States. And they all operate by different names. We're Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin. There's no reason that we are named that, except that's what our board chose to go by. We could have been called the Green and Gold Food Bank. It doesn't really matter. So there are food banks named all different things. In Eau Claire, it is Feed My People Food Bank. In Madison, it's Second Harvest of Southern Wisconsin. All of us are independent. We have our own 501c3s, we have our own boards, we operate independently, we make our own choices. We always say if you've seen one food bank, you've seen one food bank, because the next one will operate a little bit differently. But we're all connected through the national office. The national office does work at the national level, heavy-duty advocacy at the national level, but also they are engaging with national donors, the Walmarts, Targets, Costco's, Quick Trips, et cetera, and then trickle down those benefits to local. It doesn't necessarily, during COVID, we got more financial support from them. Typically, it's not financial support. Typically, it's relationship support, it's introductions, or it's the ability to access product from our large donors. But it is independent. They are separate from us. Where we interact is an agreement that we follow. It's compliance rules that we follow with our national office around food safety, storage, and how we serve our donors, food donors, and how we serve clients in need. So one of my rules, for example, is a certain level of food safety, a certain amount of distribution in the counties. But how I do that is completely up to our organization. My board could withdraw from that partnership at any time, but there's too much benefit to do that. but they are completely independent.
You mentioned if you have excess product, you can barter with other banks.
Mhm.
Is that a one-off process, or is there an actual framework and structure in place around the country?
Thank you. So the question is around the trading that we can do with other food banks, and whether it's one-off or if there's a process and a framework. It's a very formal process. It's internally it's called the choice system, and we get a certain amount of points allotted to us based on our size of the food bank. So it comes down from national office, and it's a choice system. So being a larger food bank in across the country, we're a larger one. They also measure how many people in need are within each food bank, and there's an algorithm, and that comes up with how many choice points we get. So when a national load is offered, let's say Walmart has offered a load of soup, you can use your choice points to bid on it. So there is an online kind of bartering auction system. But then there's a private part of that where I can just go directly food bank to say, hey, I have Del Monte vegetables, what are you going to trade me? And then we get a result back. And then we say, yeah, this is our best offer. We're going to go this way because this is what our need is. So it's very formal. It's an online program. I have one person who works that system all the time, and a lot gets offered on there. It's pretty exciting, and it's a lot of fun. But the idea really is about how do food banks diversify from beyond just what's available locally.
So, I mean, I'm picturing sort of like a private Amazon marketplace sort of thing?
Kind of like a private Amazon marketplace, yes. Not quite that fancy, but yes. Actually, if you talk to the person on my staff who works with it, she gets quite frustrated with it because she wishes it had that many capabilities, but it gets the job done, so we're happy.
What are some initiatives you're using or implementing to solve hunger? You talked about that a little bit. I'd like to hear more about what you're trying to do that, because that's a real hard problem, not just feeding people, but now you're teaching them how to fish.
Right. So the question is really around what we are doing to solve hunger. So in the next, I would say 2 months, if you checked our website, you're going to see our new strategic plan. It was supposed to pass the board in January, but we had to kick it into March because of COVID. And so when our new strategic plan comes out, there will be the outline, the blueprint to solve hunger. It is exceptionally complicated, and unfortunately, I don't think this will happen in my time with Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin, but I have a lot of hope in our young people who are coming up, who are technology savvy, and who are brilliant and creative and love to take risks. So I think it's the next generation that's going to figure this out a little bit better than I can. However, the things that we do is we look at it holistically. Food is... There's a lot around food. If you think of what food really is, think about your lives. When you put food on the table, and your family comes around, you have a level of expectation. You know, this is going to be a great dinner. I worked really hard on it. I made a special meal for Joey because it's Joey's birthday. Like all these things. Food has a lot of emotion to it. Food has a lot of connection to history and to ancestry and to people. This is Grandma's favorite recipe. You're at a Thanksgiving table and you're like, oh my God, who brought Grandma's biscuits? You know, whatever that is, there's so much around food. So not only is that what food is, but then there's a huge potentiality in what food can do because of all of that. Which is also, I would also go back to the arts and say, that's the same thing with music and art. I mean, it's all part of that emotion that makes us human. So solving hunger. So what solving hunger really looks like for us is we need to do hunger really well, solving hunger really, or serving hunger really well. First of all, I need to have the right food at the right time for the right people in the right quantities. I need to have nutritious food. I need to look at culturally appropriate food. I need to look at all of the data and opportunities I know to say, where does that food need to go? Who needs it? How do I get it there? I need to do my lane really, really well. So let's imagine that I do my lane really well. I have all the food that I need for all the pantries. Every part of our footprint is getting served. We're doing things really well. We're trading food. We're getting diverse. Everything is going well. If I do that, I have that to offer to the system. Now here's where Solve comes in, is I pull up alongside workforce development. I pull up alongside housing, and we go up a level. And now imagine that, and this happens, CEOs from each of those entities start talking together And as much work as we do with our organization, we now do across organizations. And we start thinking, how are we going to partner with housing? How can we work with workforce development? And now we're starting to support all of that. I'll give you a really small example, but it's a really good example of what you're asking. In Appleton, Theta Care has a behavioral health, mental health day treatment program. And it was started by 4 counselors who saw that there was a gap. There was mental health crises. People would enter the hospital. Then they'd get treated at the hospital. They'd get back out. They would get set up to visit their counselors, whatever you can do it, once a week, twice a week, whatever it was set up. But they also went back to work. They went back to their lives. And very often that crisis happened again and they were re-hospitalized. So day treatment program needed to address that. So these counselors set up this day treatment program. It was the only one around, so it pulls from 2 hours in all directions. What that did is it actually solved the fact that when that crisis happened, they were able to almost eliminate that re-hospitalization. So great for everyone involved, except it was a 6 to 8 week program that people had to go to all day, every day. How do you feed your families if you're not working during that time, and if you're on the edge anyway? And so what they were finding is where they were failing is not the mental health treatment, not the returning to work, but it was because they couldn't keep people in the program. So I just happened to be friends with one of the counselors, and we were having coffee, and she said, you know, Patty, if only we could figure out how to keep them in the program. I said, what's your biggest issue? She goes, well, sometimes it's just they can't afford to feed their families. I'm like, I gotcha. And so we kind of borrowed from Disney, and we created something called the Fast Pass program. Fast Pass meant, so this is trying things, right? Risk taking. So at first I thought, okay, if they're pulling from all over, if they could get to whatever pantry is convenient to them, regardless of the rules, no financial vetting, no geography restrictions. If I just got all the pantries to agree that anyone in this program could go to any pantry that's closest to them, so if they're at the day treatment program and they needed to go to Menasha, to St. Joe's, they go to St. Joe's. And so I got everything set up that way. And it was working, but not as well as we want. Eventually, what we said is, you know what, let's just skip all that. Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin will provide the food that's needed, just on the counselor's word that this person needs food, no questions asked. And we will provide it for as long as the counselor said this person needs help. And we were able to find that they were keeping people in the program. And so now their mental health was taken care of, which means they could go back to work, which means they were better parents to their kids, et cetera, et cetera. Tiny little example, big result. So now take any of those kind of little things and put them at scale. And that's really the power of coming together. So solving is sometimes as simple as just doing my lane well and then coming alongside others. But then it's also as complicated as, you know, how are we going to, now we have hunger and homelessness set up next to each other. Oh my gosh, now what do we do? And have to go from there. So it is a lot, and it is complicated. And if anyone has ideas, I'm always listening.
Can you just give some examples of how you partner with state organizations and other nonprofits? Most of us are from private companies. Can you give us an example of how you partner with private companies?
Yes. So sometimes it's as simple as the private companies that I know well, I will often work with them on my biggest challenges. So I might go to, I'll give you J.J. Keller as an example. I needed a lot of help with how to make my warehouse more efficient and train my team to be more efficient, to think more like the best warehouses in the world so we can move the product faster. So it was like scan guns and all of that. Financially, I wrote a grant, I got scan guns. If that was the relationship and where I ended, it would have been nice. We would have figured out scan guns, we would have done moderately better. But that's not where it stopped. I said, okay, can you help me? Can we help design together a way that we can work with your team? So they lent staff to us for a long period of time to not only teach us how to use the scan guns, but to go through and optimize our facility and really bump us up multiple levels in a very simple amount of time. I need help with HR. I have one HR person and myself, and we have a huge, we have 70 staff. So we're big compared to local nonprofits, but we're also really, really small compared to big nonprofits. But we only have one HR person, and we have a lot of HR, like everybody. HR is a really complicated thing right now. And so when I can partner with instead of hiring more staff, if I can partner with my corporations to say, can I get and then XYZ, fill it in. And it's not a one-off partnership. It's that I know that I can pick up the phone and call them. Where that makes all the difference, and I get comments from food banks all the time, or from my other food bank friends all the time, is how do you get all this stuff done? The hydroponics that I mentioned at the commercial level, if when we enter into that, I have not only the loaned legal expertise to write the document, I have people that are walking alongside saying, these are all the different ways you can do that. It would have taken me forever to learn all that. So I will say, remember, you're more than a checkbook. You're more than a volunteer. But sometimes I don't know what to ask. Sometimes I do, and I'm good at finding people. But also speak up, and ideas. When you have ideas on what to do to solve hunger, let's bring that to the table and talk about it. If you have specialty teams that you think would be helpful in a nonprofit, raise your hand because we will use it.
One last question.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned you feed 500,000 mouths a day. That's just half the state. What are you preparing for, and how does your business need to change? Are you increasing the amount that you'll feed, or do you think it'll decrease?
I am hoping we're currently at some level of stability, but as soon as I got to that thinking and I had it all planned out, inflation starts kicking in. So COVID, inflation, blah, blah, blah. And so I will say we're kind of at a point where we're not growing like this. When COVID initially hit, we were 200% increase immediately in increase in demand on our product. That has come down now to 29%, and it's been pretty stable. So we're still above pre-pandemic. I see that we're going to stabilize. I had hoped we would start to go back down because we were making great strides prior to the pandemic. We were seeing numbers decrease. This isn't even across the board. There are pantries that are seeing numbers go down already. It kind of depends on the community and what kind of supports are in there. Where I've done is I've increased my outreach, for example, so I can connect more people to systems to make sure they're connected in different ways. And by doing that, I'm hoping that stabilization really takes hold, and then we can start working again at decreasing those numbers. When you, as donors or as community members, start hearing that numbers are going down, you should think, yay, that's great work, and we need to keep it up, not time to pull back and say, oh, they don't need as much help. That is the time you want to double down and say, let's keep doing more of that.
Any other questions? How about a wonderful round of applause? Patti, thank you. You know, honestly, as I sit here today, you know, obviously a very fulfilling mission, but I've never felt so ignorant when I look at some of the statistics that you put, and I'm a finance professional, right? But when you look at where your funding comes from, you know, how your business operates, it truly is a business. It's not a not-for-profit. We don't get taxed on our profits. So thank you for enlightening me. I'm sure that there's others that feel that way as well. I've never been so glad to meet somebody that made a decision not to put their fingers in people's mouths for their career. So
Thank you.
I'm glad you found your calling. Thank you so
Thank
much. All right, folks, it's laughter and libations to the left or to your right. For those of you that are joining us on video, thank you for your attendance. I appreciate all you do and hope to see you back in 3 dimensions real soon. Good night.